Welcome everyone to Bobby Talks. ... Those dots are there to tell you that there's always more to the story. And today's story is cancel culture. Is this the death of comedy or the rebirth? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here with Settanni. He is out of Phoenix, Arizona, stand-up comedian, man of many, many hats. He is the co-host of the Trash or Treasure show. He is also has an amazing podcast called the Comedy Advice Podcast. You can catch that on Apple iTunes. I don't know about Spotify or not. Are you on the Spotify world? What do you got going on there?
Not only am I on Spotify, but I'm also part of the beta program where if you watch an episode on Spotify or listen, my video will appear. So you'll see this fabulous face with this amazing and elegant brick overlay. It's just, the creme de la creme. It's awesome.
Stefan, that is amazing. I didn't know. So you have to be a part of the beta program in order to get that. Because I was curious the other day about how do I get my video rolling, as you know, kind of like the Joe Rogan podcast is the only one I follow that I know that does that. So how did you end up on that list?
Right. Well, I talked to Joe and we did some bartering. I was like, Joe, I've got some DMT and elk meat. Would you mind? Can you get me streaming here? Can you get the video? And he was like, yeah, no problem, Steph. I can't do a Joe Rogan impression because
I don't think anybody can do a Joe Rogan impression.
Yeah, that's very true. I guess I could, but it would take 3 hours in a podcast to do.
Yeah, maybe some drinks. I don't know if you drink, but maybe a few drinks too.
Yeah, that's true. No, I did. It's desert over here in Phoenix, so I'm trying to hydrate. I had a drink last night at my Trash or Treasure show, and I forgot actually to thank you and compliment you on that wonderful intro. I feel like you're born for this. I don't know if you came out of the womb with a nice announcement like that, but I felt like you did. You're just born with this. Beautiful.
Yeah, I spent the whole morning basically practicing that opening line. No, I'm just joking. I appreciate that, man. It's just something that I'm a school teacher by trade. So during my day, I'm doing that. But I am constantly thinking about like, okay, what's the best way to introduce my guest? Give them the, credible reference or two, the way we can start the show. And the truth is, I don't say anything I don't believe in. Like I really was looking at your comedy advice podcast. Well, first of all, I did jump over. How are you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. I'm doing so much better now. I mean, if you could get my mom to speak to me the way you speak to me, this would be beautiful. I mean, with that great intro, she introduces me as this is my first disappointment. So I'm very happy to be speaking with you. And no, it's just been a great day. I as you can tell, I just took a shower. My hair is still damp. I didn't have long hair until the pandemic, when cutting your hair and going to the barber was like going to prohibition. So I've let it grow, and I think I'm going to donate these lovely locks to Locks of Love or some place that is Locks of Love canceled. I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm going to give them away and then go back to the shortcut. But
I'm sure by the end of the show they will be. Stefan, you said you're out of Phoenix, but so what is your day job? Because you're a stand-up comedian. Have you found a way to be successful doing this full time? Not just the stand-up, but like all of the hats that you wear, or are you still, grinding it out, trying to figure out how to make this thing work?
Yeah, no, I mean, as my mom says, I still am a disappointment. I haven't figured out how to do it full time, but I am grinding and I'm trying. Right now, I am a digital marketer. That's my day job. So doing SEO or search engine optimization, where I'm helping clients in my company rank at the top of Google for keywords that are relevant. And so that's what I've been doing for about 10 years. I've been in comedy for almost 4. And by comedy, it hasn't been always stand-up. So I've been doing stand-up probably the most, how would you say? I haven't been doing it that much. I've been doing a lot of podcasting, and I've been doing a lot of improv. And you had mentioned my show Trash or Treasure. We just had our 3rd edition last night. And so it's a monthly show at the House of Comedy in Phoenix, which is a comedy club, but it's very little stand-up. It's actually a lot of improv, where it's very, very fun. We end up, my co-host and I, we end up bringing 2 comedians on. We give them a topic that they don't know about until they're on stage. And one of them has to say whether it's trash, and the other one has to defend and see if it's treasure. And then the audience, they decide with their whoops and wheeze and claps and all the noises that they make. Whoever's the loudest when we say, is it trash? Is it treasure? That person wins. The other one is banished from the comedy circles. They can't do comedy ever again. No,
they have to shut it down.
But Yeah, yeah, exactly. So they go in the trash pile. We throw them in a trash can, just like Oscar the Grouch, and that's the end of it. But no, we to the point. I don't do that much stand up. I do a lot of comedy, but
Okay.
yeah, I've been doing it for about 4 years and um, trying in many ways to be able to have that my day job, from the podcast being able to grow through sponsorships and everything, and then also through the Trash or Treasure show, maybe taking it on the road, going to festivals and everything. My co-host and I are still working out the kinks a little bit,
Okay.
but it's running relatively smoothie. Yeah, it's a nice berry blend of delicious comedy, and for being the third episode, it's been going very well. So very happy, very
Yeah,
excited.
I got to tell you that the structure that you guys have is really cool. Like, it's something that I've been doing in my I teach a leadership class, and I've been trying to get these kids to come out of their shell a little bit. And we've been doing an improv style debate, which is the same thing you guys are doing. I will give them something that has an equal and like an opposite, like night and day, Halloween, Christmas type thing. You know what I mean? And they have, X amount of time to sit down in front of each other, in front of their peers, with no time to prepare and to just off the top of the head come up with what they can. It sounds like the exact same thing you guys are doing, and except at a much more hilarious level. But that's awesome, dude. So I love that structure. How did you guys manage to get the House of Comedy on board with that? I mean, is that something that you network your way through? I mean, because that's a pretty good venue out there, correct?
Yeah, it is. It is. And a great question. It's better if you don't know. The details are a little salacious. No, I'm kidding. We just asked them. We ended up so serendipity, I guess. My podcast, the Comedy Advice Podcast, I had connected with, and I can't remember if he reached out to me, but my co-host of Trash or Treasure, Lamar Mitchell Jr. Shout out to
Okay.
him. Hilarious comedian, great guy. And he runs a couple shows. And we ended up, I had him on my podcast with his co-host of another show that was happening at the House of Comedy. And it went well. He was impressed with my demeanor and my hilarious jokes. And he thought, you know what? I ended up he for his next show, he couldn't make it, and he asked me to be his co-host
Okay.
or his fill-in. And so I ended up doing it, and I did a stupendous job. And he thought, okay, I think we could probably do something together. And that show was fizzling out a little bit. I think the other co-host, she was amazing as well, but she just had some other priorities, was working on some other stuff. So it started to fizzle, and I guested there again, and he was like, man, we got to do something together. So then I ended up conceiving this idea of Trash or Treasure, brought it to him. We worked together to refine it, and then we packaged it and sold it to House of Comedy, and they said, yeah, sure, let's give it a try. And I ended up talking to the booker and had him on my podcast on one of my recent episodes, and he gave a lot of really good advice for comedians on how to get booked. And he ended up talking to me about it. He was like, I didn't know what to expect, to be honest with you, but I'm willing to give things a try. And I was entertained by it. So,
Yeah.
and that seems to be one thing that's very cool about it. Is since it's improv, a lot of it, the winners of the rounds get to do 10 minutes of stand up each.
That's kind of
So
that's the
the last
reward,
20.
right? They get to do a set of their, yeah. That's a smart thing. I like that.
Yeah, that's their treasure, their golden doubloons. So they get that, but the rest of it is really improv. So the cool thing about that is we get to market it in a different way, where if you have a stand-up show, it's usually the same material, just because it's very difficult to be able to come up with 5 minutes that just slays, that kills.
Yeah.
And so what we have is something that's going to be different every single time. And so we've seen regulars come in that are like, oh man, I love every show, it's getting better and better, and it's always different and refreshing. And so and you're very charming, your hair is so majestic, those lovely locks are just amazing. And then my co-host says thank you, and then I don't know what compliments I get, but it happens, and it just flows so nicely, and I'm really excited about it. And the cool thing is, being the host, I get to sit back and relax most of the time.
I was just gonna go there. I was just gonna go there. There's literally no pressure on you to be funny, but when you have your moments, you get to pick and choose when you want to attack or when you want to. I mean, that's got to be like the comedian's dream. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's wonderful, man. I just get to we do our intro for 10 minutes, then we do a little sketch, and we've been writing sketches and putting those out. The last one was really, really funny. I'm gonna post it online soon, but it was about
Okay.
non-dairy alternatives and the best non-dairy alternative. And we ended up collabing with this guy that's been going to all the shows. His name is Joe Audio. He's a great person. He's also a hip hop artist. And so
Oh,
he has this
interesting.
song called yeah, and he's got this song called Horchata in My Cup. So we did a sketch with him about how I'm eating Oreos, and my co-host Lamar, he's like, wait, are you eating Oreos without milk? And I'm like, no, don't worry, dude, I got water. And he's like, no, that's disgusting. You gotta have it with milk. And I say, I'm lactose intolerant. We try and run through the list of non-dairy alternatives. And then Joe Audio comes through dressed kind of as Jesus, and he brings the holy horchata. And it's just hilarity ensues. It's wonderful. But to your point though, we get to go up, do the intro, and then we're moderating, so we're still up there, and we can interject whenever we want, but it's the comedian's time to shine. So we get to build up the local community as well as just
Yeah.
be there as well. It's great.
No, it's a great showcase for those local comedians, yourselves. I mean, you're putting a product out there that is, a little bit different. It reminds me of there's these guys online. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not. They're kind of a startup podcast as well, but they're called the Blasphemous Debate. Have you seen these guys?
No, I haven't.
So what they do is they do a little bit more edgier content, a little more rated R with their stuff, but they'll be all over the place. But it's kind of like around the horn meets the debate style that you're doing, and they will all sit around and take turns debating whether or not Thanksgiving is trash or treasure, or our one night stands, are they classy or are they not classy, and they'll just debate these types of things.
Very nice.
And I think it's a really good. I'm seeing more and more. Not necessarily props, but like comics using PowerPoint slides and more visual effects, like the Bo Burnhams and everything he brings to a comedy show. It's just, it seems like that's more successful than you used to get in, I'd say like the 80s and 90s of stand-up comedy and those types of things. I know you guys are more of a variety show, but that kind of, it just feels like there's a place for that now, where it maybe 20, 30 years ago, it didn't really fit. So.
Oh, 100%. We've got the slides. We're up there with those visuals, and yeah, we're definitely very similar. We have the people we just had last night. One of the topics was Thanksgiving dinner, trash or treasure. So we had one
I
of the
saw
comments.
that.
Yeah. So it was fantastic. Great time. Yeah, but that's awesome. And you're right.
Well, here's what I want to do. I mean, I've got some heavy stuff I want to touch on. We can do it in a fun way. It don't matter to me. But I did want to talk about some of the guests that you've had on your Comedy Advice podcast, because this blows me away. Ladies and gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these, because I don't want to misspeak. But Brad Sherwood of Whose Line Is It Anyways? I'm always going to mess this guy's name up from the league. But Steve Rannazzisi.
Oh, Steve Rannazzisi. Yes.
Yeah, Rannazzisi. Yes. Christopher Titus, Michael Yo, Pablo Francisco, Tom Papa, and but not Bill Burr. That was a April Fool's that you definitely got me on when I was going deep into your dive there. I was like, oh my God, he got Bill Burr. But Tom Papa in its own right, man. Just congratulations on the list of people that you've been able to sit down and talk to. That's a pretty cool roster of lineup there you got.
Thank you so much, man. And I have to thank it all to COVID. Despite all the horrible things that it's done, and the people that it's made sick, the one fortunate and serendipitous thing for me was I was doing stand-up and I was doing podcasting, and I was like, you know what, with the job that I have right now, my priority number one is to have food on the table, give my wife all the love and attention she needs, so I can do my full-time job and one of these things 100% and really go with it. And I ended up deciding to go with podcasting. Then COVID hit, and it was very, very beneficial in that way, because all the things, every place closed because of COVID, and a lot of stand-up comedians had nothing to do. So I started, I think Brad Williams may have been my first big guest. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he has some Showtime specials. He was on Netflix's The Degenerates, where they had some of the most raunchy stand-ups do their material. I think it was in Las Vegas.
I'm not familiar with
And
him, but I definitely will go check him out. I'll hop on there and see if because I'm sure I do. He might be that guy. I don't know if you ever listened to Bill Simmons and the Rewatchables podcast, but like they have an award for that guy that just shows up in movies that nobody really knows their name. He might be that guy to me. So
yeah, he might be. He definitely might be. And so through him and then just snowballing, it's turned into me being able to having the fortune of speaking with so many good people, and including that roster that you had mentioned, and several folks from Whose Line Is It Anyway, it's one of my favorite shows. And
yeah, you had
Tom Popper
Colin,
was amazing.
You had Colin on as well, correct? I forget his last name.
Yeah, Colin Mochrie.
Mochrie, yeah.
Colin Mochrie.
Yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah,
Those guys are something. I mean, it sounds like to me that's more of the world that you're trying to dive into, more of that improv, that sketch. What's the dream, man? Is the dream to run your own podcast successfully? Is it to be kind of wear multiple hats, be on TV, SNL? Like, what's your dream? What are you looking at?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. My dream, and it's something that I don't know if I would have been able to answer several months ago, maybe even weeks ago, but recently and you're second off, maybe another compliment. Let's get you wet with some compliments from the compliment shower.
Yeah.
Great intro. Start off. You're doing your research, which is great, and very, very astute and observant with your observations. And so I do want to do and lean more towards the Whose Line Is It Anyway thing. And my dream is to star in a show that's very similar to either Whose Line Is It Anyway, Impractical Jokers. I love that show. Love the Jokers.
Me too,
and
man.
Being able to interact on the fly. I love doing that type of stuff. And I feel like through taking improv classes, through the podcast, I've been able to really chisel that wit into something that's very sharp and be able to quip with some of the greats out there. And so I want to be able to do something like that, where stand-up, I like stand-up. It's really cool. I respect people that do stand-up, but I've done it to the point where I'm going to still do it just because it's kind of like leg day. If you skip it, your body's going to look weird. So my comedy might be a little less glamorous looking if I don't do stand-up. So I'm still putting that in, but that's not really where I want to go. I want to continue. I like writing. I like sketches, but I really like the Impractical Jokers, Whose Line Is It Anyway, that improv-y type stuff. Yeah.
Well, man, Godspeed to you. Continued success. It seems like every time you continue to just keep pushing forward, another door opens for you, and it just offers another opportunity at networking and maybe getting to a place where you can kind of find that Impractical Jokers, but in a more of a setting of what you're trying to do. It's going to come. Just keep pushing through. That's all we can do. So I would love if we can, just because I know we got a hard out with you here. I want to talk on today's subject if we can, and it's cancel culture. And maybe I'm putting a lot of pressure on you guys, the comedians, but I actually believe it. Now, let me give a little context here first and foremost about me. I am not somebody that is I'm in the middle on a lot of things. That's kind of where I fall, right? You tend to see that cancel culture was an overcorrection of a lack of accountability for so long, right? And then accountability comes up, and it seems like now the pendulum could potentially swing back to the middle as people are fighting back against kind of like the politically correct police, And I look at comedy, I look at comedians as those frontline soldiers that can observe, as they always do, some of the ridiculous things that are taking place in society and make the jokes about them, allow us to laugh at ourselves a little bit. If society and the comedians are brave enough to go there, because it seems like for the last 5 or 6, maybe 7 years, we've been overcorrecting, and maybe there was a place and a time for it, but now it feels like it needs to shift back. And Dave Chapelle has kind of been, honored as the white knight in this fight against it, but I'm not 100% sure that that's a fair assessment for me to say to him. But he did have his last, The Closer was his last, his special that just was on Netflix is the last one that he dropped. It's the 6th one that he was going to do, and then he's walking away for a while. And have you had a chance to watch it at all, Stefan?
You know what? I actually just watched it this morning. And
okay, great.
Yeah. And so it's fresh in the mind. It was very interesting. And I I am part of these different groups in Facebook where they talk about the special. They talk about whether it is transphobic, whether Dave crossed the line in some of his jokes and everything. And so it's very interesting to see the different types of perspectives that people have on the special, and cancel culture as well. And it's also, I guess I could also preface this with, you know how if you're going to invest in the stock market, you're going through a broker and they say we are not responsible for any dips, gains, or you're
Yep.
losing all your money essentially.
Yeah.
I guess similar to that, my opinion might not matter at all.
Right.
I'm giving the perspective of who I am, from my point of view, and it could be completely different to somebody else's. So I'll start off with that, but from what I saw a lot of things in the closer. I enjoyed it. I also think that it may have been something beyond a comedy special,
Okay.
where he had his jokes, but he also there's a message, and maybe that's not beyond a comedy special. Maybe that's just a comedy special in a different. It's a genre, right?
Sure.
Because there's all types of comedians, and that, like a Mitch Hedberg, does he have a true? Did he have a true message in his comedy? I don't know. Maybe not.
I don't think
Some people are
anybody
just
knows.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There are some that don't really have too much. They don't divulge too much in their personal lives, and others. I had Chris Gethard on, and he is a masterful storyteller, and he tells these great stories. He has a special that was released on HBO that talks about his depression and how he was suicidal, and he ended up overcoming it, and it was so gripping in terms of his storytelling plus the setups and the premises and punchlines throughout. And so it seems like Dave's special was very similar. It not similar in terms of the stories, but he had stories sprinkled in there. He also had setups and punchlines and was trying to talk about the irony in what he was saying, and maybe also display that what he's saying is a joke, and he's joking a lot of the times.
Right.
And it seems to me, I'd be curious to what you think about this, but it seems to me like the theme of this majorly was him trying to give his perspective of what the backlash has been from the LGBT community about the remarks that he said back in, I can't remember what date he said it was, but 16 years ago, 20 years ago, when he was doing stand up at this little club and ended up saying something that offended somebody, and they ended up bringing it to the press, and
Right.
then that was shed to light. And so that's what it sounded like to me.
No, I think you're right. I definitely think he was trying to definitely shed light on his perspective of that whole situation. And I think there's been some other situations that have taken place since then. And he's been trying to,
Yeah.
you know, the interesting about comedians, though, is that in that setting, he controls the environment. Right now, in a sense, the variable is the crowd. The crowd could turn on him real quick, right? But they paid a ticket, or they bought a ticket to come see Dave Chapelle, so they already kind of know what they're getting into. So for the most part, he kind of controls that setting. So he controls the narrative and how he, he can
Right.
push it a
Right.
little bit to where he's being honest, but then he can tell a joke and make us kind of think that maybe he was just joking and it's not necessarily his perspective or his feelings. And a lot of times when you are sharing a piece of you in this this type of medium, a lot of people will argue that it's kind of a cop-out because every time you think you're getting a real answer, he can just put a joke in there and say, I was joking, and kind of hide behind the joke. I think the master part of what he does is that if you're paying attention close enough, you can kind of tell when he kind of goes in and out of the two. The part that I disagreed on, and it doesn't necessarily matter, it's just my particular opinion, is when he just kind of stone cold put a stake in the ground and said that there's only two genders. Fact. Now, in my opinion, gender is fluid. There's two biological sexes, but gender is fluid. But he took such a hardline stance on that. And I thought that was the moment that maybe the backlash could have started to come from. But then he doubled down and tripled down and did so much more with it. Let me ask this question, because I'm rambling a little bit.
Yeah.
Is it the job of stand-up comedians or comedians in general to push the limits and pull back a little bit on some of society's ridiculousness, to pull the curtain back and show us a little bit of who we are? Do you think that's who we are? Should they just stick to family fun jokes and keep it clean and nobody gets hurt? Because it's not been that way.
Right. I think the comedian's job is to make people laugh. I think that if they're able to do that by pushing limits and talking about things that might be sensitive, might not make sense to them, or their own idiosyncrasies, anything like that, I think that's really their job. And so if they are going to go into those dangerous waters like Dave Chapelle did, I think they have to brace themselves for pushback, because ultimately everybody, you hit a point where comedy is very nuanced. So I feel like you said, it might be a cop out where somebody says something and then has a joke. I think that it could be, but it could also be incredibly masterful to take something that usually gives a specific type of emotion and make it funny.
Right.
Ali Sadiq tells a story. He on Comedy Central, they have this Is Not Happening, where Ari Shafir brings on these comedians and they tell real life stories. And he tells these stories of one of them, I forgot prison riot, where he ended up talking about when he first went to prison and there was going to be a prison riot. The ending is where he gets stabbed, but people are laughing at it because he was able to twist it in a way where he was taking terror and making it funny
and flipping it on itself. Yeah.
So, but to go back to your question though, is it the comedian's job? I don't think it is. I think the comedian's job is to make people laugh. And however they're able to do that, I think it's through really going beyond the surface and looking at yourself. Like for me, the things that I've written about are either personal stories, whether they're crazy or embarrassing. Embarrassing, I think, is good because you're reaching in and you're taking these moments similar to the prison riot story, where you can turn embarrassment into hilarity. I talk about I talk about my wife. I talk about my family. I talk a little bit about Italians and Italian culture, just because I lived in Italy and I speak Italian, and my family's Italian. So I was an Italian teacher for a little while.
Oh, really? Interesting.
But yeah. But there might be some people that are interested in that. Like I'm not too interested in politics, so my comedy's probably not going to be about that. Some other people are very interested in politics, like Michael Rappaport.
Yeah.
he has a very adamant stance against Trump, and so he keeps digging and digging and digging and digging. I think it's his job, if that's what he's passionate about and that's what he wants to talk about, is to say it in a way that makes people laugh. Because if they're not laughing, then it's not comedy anymore. So,
well, that's the biggest thing. I guess, let me ask this question then. You said it's their job to make people laugh, but you're never going to make everybody on both sides, if you do go down those waters, okay, you're never going to make everybody on both sides of that laugh, because you're isolating one side of the argument, right? So in this case, the LGBTQT community did not feel that they were being represented in those jokes. They felt like they were being attacked. And even though there's a lot of people that are laughing and on the other end of it, it doesn't mean that they're laughing at the LGBTQT community. But that's how it's being presented right now. If you were to, dive into the media, dive into anything online, these forums, and to be honest with you, the people that were a part of Netflix, I don't know if you're familiar with the Netflix portion of it, but they have LGBTQT members that work at the company and that have walked out. Some have been fired. There's this big controversy within just their business model. But I think it's, in this country, you have the right to say what you want. You also have the right to the consequences of saying what you want. And in this case, he's riding both, right? He's getting the backlash, but he's also getting the praises. Where I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious is what warrants someone, and especially a comedian, to be canceled. And maybe Dave Chapelle is too big to be canceled, which I don't necessarily believe in. I think in this situation, he hasn't crossed that threshold yet. Anybody can be canceled. I think there's proof of that with some of these big wigs, you know, out of Hollywood. But yeah, just going back to the question though, is that I feel like with somebody like a Dave Chapelle, I don't know. I feel like even though he's not been quote unquote canceled, what warrants somebody to be canceled?
Yeah. And I think I want to go back to one of the things that you said too on you can't make everybody laugh. I feel that you can if you present it in the right way.
Okay.
And I think that
In today,
I've
Stefan, I
seen
want to
some
ask you though. I
comedians
want
do
to
it.
push back. In today's society, you still feel
Yeah,
that way?
I do.
Okay.
Because I've seen some comedians, I've seen a lot of comedians. Let's take Trump, for example. And some comedians might be against Trump. They where I think the real, and it's hard to do. I'm not saying it's easy, because
Right.
that's another thing. A lot of people attempt it, but not everybody succeeds at it. But I feel like if you really try to look at the other side, talk to people on the other side, get a deep understanding of what they're feeling, and look beyond your own perspective, I feel like you can try and take that and twist things. Where some people have, say, made fun of, like they're anti-Trump, but then they make fun of their own side, and so they
Right.
have a little bit of both. And so I feel like doing that, a little bit of a comedy waltz, could help make both sides laugh, loosen them up, and show them that you're joking and you're able to laugh at yourself, laugh at your beliefs and everything, and not just laugh at somebody else. And then to talk about what warrants somebody to be canceled, that's a difficult question. I'm not sure if I'm the one to be able to answer that.
You have to. I brought you on Bobby Talks. You have to. No, I'm just joking. You're supposed to speak on behalf of all comedians now. I'm just joking.
Yeah, it's difficult. I feel like if back to what I said before, if you're going to talk about some of these things where people are very, very sensitive, and you're speaking as if you don't fully understand or have tried to understand their perspective on things, then if the community is galvanized enough, they can go after you, and there will be repercussions. And so I feel like you have to be very careful with certain topics, and if you speak out in a slapdash punchline, then
yeah.
I don't know, but then let's go back to the definition of cancel. Cancel is you're completely eradicated from all your sponsors. You'll never do any TV work or comedy work or anything like that again.
Yeah, and that's where we're at, is that it feels like a lot of times people are getting canceled now for things that they might have done 10, 20 years ago, and 30, 40 years ago. And that one's kind of tough to me, because I also believe that people grow as human beings. And the question is are they supposed to kind of ring the bell on themselves from something they did 20, 30 years ago and put a spotlight on themselves and say, hey, I did this? And, like John Gruden, for example, I'm not sure if you're a sports fan or not, but John Gruden had these emails that he knew were out there. And he had these emails that were pretty ugly, and there was undertones of racism. There was undertones of a lot of things in there. This was 10, 15 years ago. Now, some people would say that John Gruden's not that guy, but he had a bad night or two in some emails. But what's he supposed to do? Is now in 2021, is he supposed to cast a light on his own, shadow that nobody knows exists yet? Until it does? I mean, how do you fix your wrong from 20, 30 years ago without shining a light on it and canceling yourself? Like, I don't know how you do it. And I just not sure I want to live in this society where we have to constantly be perfect, because that's not realistic as a human being. We have flaws that, and I think if you're constantly trying to be better and learning from your mistakes, I want to be held accountable, but at the same time, there is a fine line.
I agree. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, man, well, I can't even remember what Robert Downey Jr. did, but didn't he do cocaine and
Yeah.
hookers and lots of
Lots of
lots of
hookers.
unsavory things? Yeah,
Yeah.
lots of frivolity and promiscuity, and he
Yeah.
ended up killing it as Tony Stark in Iron Man. And I think that maybe not everyone is going to change, but I feel like, I mean, even in prison, and there are the people that are there for life, but for the most part, I mean, for many crimes, you're getting out in a certain amount of years, and so in terms of the canceling, I feel like people do get, and I'm an optimist, so I feel
Yeah.
like people get better. I have grown so much. I was a spoiled little prince when I was a boy, and I feel like I have grown so much to a spoiled little king. No, but I feel like I've grown so much. I've become so much more mature. That I would cringe at some of the things that I would do or say
Yeah.
years ago. So I feel like, man, I think everybody has done or said something that could get them canceled
Yeah.
if they were ever in the spotlight. So I think it might revolve back to the perspectives of, if you are taking the perspective of somebody else that said something and thought, okay, I've done that too, then would you be more lenient on that? And I think it's, oh God, I mean, it really, it does come to trying to understand each other. I think it all boils down to.
And that's the key, is that, and it's not just, in the cancel culture world, it's politics, it's all of our social media platforms that you see. There's a lot of toxic behavior taking place because we have a lack of listening to one another, and nobody wants to compromise with each other anymore. I kind of feel like that's where the Dave Chappelle special is that I watched it, and I tried to watch it. Even I'm a Dave Chappelle fan, but like I even
Right.
watched it as objective as I possibly could to see where the outrage was with it. And there are jokes. There are jokes that Dave Chappelle has been doing for 20 plus years, but not just against the LGBTQ. I mean, there's jokes in there about white people. There's jokes in there about his own community of black people. And he's been doing that forever. I thought he did take an all-inclusive nature, even though the message and the perspective he was telling was centralized and focused on that community, and particularly defending himself against the backlashes of that community. But I think a lot of times what's happening right now is people are failing to see any of the other perspectives or any of the other things that took place in that special, and are only focusing on how it impacted them. And without that listening or that compromising, you're just going to continue to have this world full of overcorrections, or I've been offended, you must suffer the consequences because of it. I don't know. I just I don't see it. I hope I'm wrong. I'm an optimistic too. I think you're optimistic in the sense of when you talked about cancel culture, that you don't actually necessarily believe it's canceled forever. They do their, maybe they serve their time and they come back from it, like a Chris D'Elia. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
He did some stuff
And
that I don't necessarily agree that was cancel culture. That was being held accountable for his actions. But he's back in,
right.
he's back on his own podcast and doing things of that nature now. So he's starting to get people to kind of.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And I think that it, you hit on a really good point too, on us not being able to communicate very well and anymore. And I feel like the I'm going to try and choose my words very carefully, but I can understand this, and again, this is coming from the perspective of a hetero cis male,
Right.
white male, but I can understand why the trans community is sensitive and is quick to react to comments and everything. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying I can understand why.
Sure.
Because I feel David also said something like, the LGBTQ community has made amazing progress in the past 20 years. I was watching movies. I can't remember what movie I was watching, but they were saying extremely homophobic things. And this was like, maybe it was Dude, Where's My Car? Or was, in the early 2000s and late 90s, these
Yeah.
movies were riddled with, oh, that's gay. Or they'd
Yeah.
say other words that are bad. And so I feel like they have gone through so much, and it's only been a short period of time that they've been in this position where people are finally starting to respect them. People are finally able to understand a little bit, and I feel like but there's still so much because it's come up so quick. I feel like it's also brought a lot more attention, and so
Yes.
with that attention, I feel like people are asking questions, and so I think I liked how Dave Chapelle was talking about the communication between him and Daphne, where
Yes.
he was asking questions. It was this comfortable environment, and he just stuff you don't know.
Right.
And I feel like we all have questions about each other. And this brings me back to my Italian teaching days. I remember when I was teaching it, and I was with other teachers as well, some better than others. But I remember when I was teaching my students, and they'd try and speak Italian, and they'd say like, mi chiamo, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, that was great. The only moderation I do is I would say, mi chiamo Alessandro e mi piacerebbe fare così. And so when you give that encouragement, the patience, and then the answer, then they continue trying to speak your language.
Yes.
If you're like wrong, you don't say it like that. They're going to stop trying to speak your language. And I'm hoping this winds into this metaphor of speaking languages and understanding people's perspectives, because I feel like there's a little bit of that backlash where some people outside of the community are asking questions, and then there's the backlash, or people might be making comments, and then there's the immediate backlash. And so it's creating divisiveness. And I'm not isolating the LGBTQ community to this.
Right.
I think a lot of communities are like this. But I understand why the LGBTQ community is like this, at least from my perspective. So that was a ramble, but hopefully some of that made sense.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct, and to be in their shoes, you understand why they're so hypersensitive to these things, because they be damned will not be going backwards, right? And if they feel a threat to that, they will push back against it. My issue is that did we really? I want to make sure not just their community, but all communities. We really need to make sure that we're listening to the whole thing, because I really believe that a guy like Dave Chapelle would be a great ally of theirs. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I think he's somebody
100%.
that is a big enough star, has enough influence in this country, especially with an African-American community, especially with males 18 to 49, especially with a lot of things where he has influence, that he can push their agenda further and help, because they don't necessarily have a poster face for anything. I'm just saying, in this particular argument, I feel like if they could figure out a way for him to come out, or for them to sit down at the same table and have those conversations, rather than being what you said, you're wrong, you're canceled.
Yeah.
And I don't know that comes from the community. That might just be a media taking things over, and now they're forming their own narrative, because that's a problem in this country too. But it just feels like a lot of times, because we might have a misunderstanding with each other, that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't agree and we're not a great ally of yours. I just want that to be on that side of the coin as well. Man, that was great discussion. We're running out of time here. You've got 9 minutes before you go, and I kind of want to talk to you if I can, about we'll kind of drop the heavy stuff, and just who's some of your favorite comedians, man. I personally, in the variety act, the improv, like, Jim Carrey is a personal hero of mine, not just from comedy standpoint, but just his perspective on life. I love the way he approaches life and his mind set to everything. Robin Williams was another guy, and these are the guys that quick-witted, maybe nobody better. I would say is the gold standard. I don't know what your thoughts and opinions are, but what are some of the heroes of yours and guys that you try to emulate yourself after?
Oh man, I think it comes. So I want to park the car and just take a gander at the
Sure.
lovely, marvelous Jim Carrey, because I feel like Jim Carrey, he is hilarious. I think I've grown to appreciate the little things that he does in all of his movies, and he's just so funny. And I listened to a commencement speech of his, and I thought he was fantastic. Have you heard it?
It is. I will literally. I will listen to it 6 times a year. It is the number one thing in my
Same.
life. It's you when you he found a way to like make words come together and hit every time I hear it. That commencement speech is my favorite thing that he's ever done.
Oh, same. I was floored the first time I heard it, and I also listen to it maybe 6 times a year. I don't know why, but I got on this commencement speech kick, so I started listening to his. I really liked Steve Jobs' commencement speech at Stanford, and then author Neil Gaiman gave an amazing commencement speech as well. Those are my top three. Yeah. And
Neil, say that name again. Neil who?
Neil Gaiman, Neil space Gaiman is Gaiman. I think.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out, man. That Jim Carrey commencement speech, though, just bringing it back to him.
Yeah.
Some of the one-liners that he had in there, it just hit so hard. And there's not like we have a similar or our upbringing, but it's just some of the way, he talks about hope and fear and the fire and how we leap over it versus walking through it. And he talks about his father and that piece where he said that my father was the funniest man I ever knew, but he felt like he had to raise us, and that he failed at a job that he didn't love. So he talks to the students about how you can fail at something that you don't love, so you might as well take a chance on something you do. And it's just like it just hits me so hard every time.
Oh, I just got goosebumps just reimagining that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very, very good. But Jim Carrey, great one. Other comedians that I really look up to, I really, man, you would think that I had a better answer for this, but
well, you're still new to the game, man. You're 4 years in. You're still figuring this out.
I will say, in the theme of all of this, I had the pleasure of interviewing Lisa Lampanelli, the Queen of Mean.
The Queen
Insults
of Mean.
everybody.
Yeah.
She is one of my favorite comedians. She
really
graced me with her presence on the podcast, and I know she's been famous for a lot of those roasts on Comedy Central. She roasted Donald Trump and David Hasselhoff and all those folks.
She's amazing.
She was so good, and she actually retired from being the Queen of Mean, and then she ended up getting into self-help, and then she's back touring, I believe, but it's like we went to go see her show, and part of it was this Q&A where I don't know who the connection is, and I should know, and I feel bad about that, but it's like a fireside chat, and she's talking about how her life, how she made the different the choices that she made, and it's absolutely hilarious. And then at the very end, she does a roast where she roasts herself, but then she also goes out and roasts the crowd. And one thing she said that really stood out to me too was she said on the interview of the podcast she said, I have worked so hard I've worked so hard to insult people without hurting their feelings. And it took a little while to digest that one, but seeing her do it, she's so masterful, where she can totally rip into you and make you crack up. She did. I mean, she had a Q&A at the very end, and I had a question for her, and I asked it, and she totally ripped into me. She, with the hair and everything, she was like, "Oh, are you going to sing me a little song there, hippie?" And then she was like, "Oh, I remember you from the podcast." And she said, "Oh, I did Stefan's little shitty podcast, and I graced him with my presence." Just totally shat all over me, and in such a way that made me crack up amongst other people. And she was able to do it like it didn't matter your sexuality, it didn't matter your race.
Right.
And so she was able to walk that line in such a fine way and show that it was all coming from a place of love.
Right. I would have never thought that the queen of mean would have been such an empathetic human being.
Oh, yeah, right. I thought the same thing because I remember seeing her stand up, like her Comedy Central specials in 2006 or something like that. And yeah, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I would be scared to speak to her. And
you know, it's funny. Far too often, I mean, comedians are artists. You guys are artists. I mean, we're doing a podcast right now. I consider this my art. We're putting ourselves out there. We're vulnerable, but you guys do it at a different level. And a lot of times you find that even though they're roasting or they're telling jokes that might offend, those people are the most insecure, or maybe not insecure, but maybe the most empathetic people that are out there, because they are thinking about human beings all the time and their disposition and their placement in the world. That's such a, I don't know, just such an important thing. So you guys are, you know, I think Robin Williams struggled with that. He was such a kind-hearted human being. You know, he was just a masterful talent when it came to improv and just being quick-witted, faster than anybody I've ever seen. But that's just my own personal with him. So,
no,
Stefan,
I totally agree.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, bud. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there are plenty of us that are assholes. And so we should.
And you definitely are one. Like, how dare you come on my show for an hour and just bore the shit out of us? So.
It's what I do best. I speak and I don't listen. So my wife says the same thing. But it was a pleasure to be able to grace you with my presence and come on your little shitty podcast. And no, I'm kidding. This is a great time, man.
I appreciate that, man. I really do. And I want to make sure I hold up my end of it. Let's stay in touch. I'll reach out to you. You reach out to me. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And just a little bit of business, if you guys can, check him out at a Comedy Advice podcast, Trash or Treasure Show. All those things can be found at his Instagram, Settani. All those things, I'll put the links in there. Everybody can find you, no worries. And then also follow, like, and subscribe. Bobby Talks on Down the Road. And Stefan, been a pleasure, buddy.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much. And hope we cross paths again. This was wonderful.
All right, man. Have a good job, or good luck with whatever you're doing tonight. Guys, we'll see you on Down the Road. Have a good night.